My name's Chloe. I'm 22, and let's just say my family makes the Kardashians look like the Brady Bunch. I've always been the good kid, the one who got straight A's, never caused any trouble, and always knew how to say the right thing to make my parents beam with pride. My younger sister, Mia, well, she was different. Always a bit of a rebel, a free spirit who marched to the beat of her own drum. She was the artist, the dreamer, the one who questioned everything and never quite fit into the neat little box my parents tried to squeeze her into. Growing up, I was always aware of the disparity in how our parents treated us. I got new clothes, fancy extracurricular activities, and endless praise and encouragement. Mia got hand-me-downs, a curfew, and a constant barrage of criticism about her grades, her friends, and her choices. It wasn't that our parents were outright cruel to her. They just didn't really see her. They didn't understand her. They didn't appreciate her unique talents, and they certainly didn't celebrate her individuality. They were always trying to mold her into something she wasn't, trying to force her to conform to their narrow definition of success. I always felt a pang of guilt about it, a nagging sense of injustice, but I was also, if I'm being honest, a bit complacent. I enjoyed being the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. I basked in the glow of my parents' approval, and I didn't want to rock the boat, so I kept my mouth shut. I witnessed the subtle slights, the unfair comparisons, and the constant undermining of Mia's confidence, and I said nothing. I told myself that it wasn't my place to interfere, that it was their business, that I didn't want to cause any trouble. But deep down, I knew I was being a coward. I was afraid of losing my privileged position, afraid of my parents' disapproval, afraid of rocking the boat and disrupting the fragile peace that held our family together. And then, the bomb dropped. I was 7 months pregnant at the time, living at home with my boyfriend, preparing for the arrival of our first child. My parents were ecstatic, already planning the nursery, buying tiny clothes, and showering me with attention and affection. I was happy, of course, but also overwhelmed by the impending arrival of this tiny human who would turn my world upside down. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. I couldn't make out all the details, but I heard enough to send a chill down my spine. They were discussing Mia, about how she needed to move out, about how they needed the space for the baby, about how she was old enough to be on her own. My heart sank. Mia was only 16. 16, and they were kicking her out. On her birthday, no less? It was cruel, heartless, and utterly unfair. I confronted them, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. How could you do this to her? I demanded. She's your daughter. You can't just throw her out like that. They defended their decision, citing the need for space, the financial burden of another child, and the fact that Mia was old enough to take care of herself. But their excuses rang hollow, their justifications flimsy. I could see the cold, calculating logic behind their actions, the same logic that had always prioritized my needs over Mia's. I felt a surge of guilt and shame. I had been complicit in their favoritism, a silent bystander to their injustice, and now, my own pregnancy, my own impending motherhood, had become the catalyst for their cruelest act yet. I knew I had to do something, to stand up for Mia, to protect her from the people who were supposed to love and cherish her. But I was also terrified of losing my parents' love, terrified of disrupting the fragile peace that held our family together, terrified of facing the consequences of my own inaction. But in that moment, something shifted within me. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a newfound sense of responsibility, a fierce determination to do what was right no matter the cost. I would no longer be a bystander. I would be Mia's advocate, her protector, her voice in the wilderness. The days after Sarah moved out were strange. The house felt eerily quiet, like an empty seashell that used to echo with the sounds of laughter, bickering, and the general chaos of teenage life. I was used to having her around, even if we weren't exactly best friends. We'd bicker over the bathroom, steal each other's clothes, and generally get on each other's nerves, typical sister stuff. But now, there was just this emptiness, a void that seemed to amplify the growing unease within me. I tried to focus on my own life. I was 7 months pregnant after all, and nesting instincts were kicking in full force. My boyfriend, Chris, was amazing, super supportive, and already acting like a doting dad-to-be. We spent our days painting the nursery, assembling baby furniture, and arguing over baby names. It was exciting, terrifying, and everything I thought I wanted. But even with all the excitement of preparing for our baby, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. It was like a shadow lurking in the corners of my mind, a disquiet that refused to be silenced. I found myself staring out the window for hours, lost in thought, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Then came the bombshell. I was scrolling through Facebook, idly browsing through the endless stream of baby photos and engagement announcements, when I saw it. A post from Sarah detailing everything that had happened. She wrote about how our parents had kicked her out on her 16th birthday, how they'd prioritized my baby over her, how she felt abandoned and betrayed. My blood ran cold. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I knew our parents favored me. They always had. But this was a whole new level of messed up. I reread the post, each word like a hammer blow to my conscience. She described the day she was told to leave, the coldness in our parents' eyes, the lack of concern for her well-being. She wrote about the shame she felt, the feeling of being unwanted, disposable. The comments section was exploding, with family members and friends expressing their shock and disgust. Aunts, uncles, and cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years, were weighing in, condemning our parents' actions, and offering Sarah their support. It was a public shaming, a family feud spilling out onto the internet for all the world to see. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The hushed conversations I'd overheard, the tension between Sarah and our parents, the way they'd always brushed aside her feelings, her needs, her very existence. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I saw the ugly truth of their actions, their blatant favoritism, their disregard for Sarah's well-being. I felt a surge of guilt, a wave of shame washing over me. How could I have been so oblivious, so wrapped up in my own little world that I hadn't seen the pain Sarah was going through? I was the golden child, the one they doted on, the one they prioritized, and in their eyes, Sarah was just expendable, a burden, an inconvenience. I confronted my parents, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "How could you do this to her?" I demanded, my own pregnancy suddenly feeling like a weight, a symbol of their betrayal. "She's your daughter. How could you just throw her out like that?" They tried to defend themselves, their voices tight with defensiveness. They said it was for the best, that Sarah needed to learn to be independent, that they were just trying to make space for the new baby. But their excuses rang hollow, their justifications flimsy. I could see the guilt in their eyes, the shame they tried to hide behind their carefully constructed facade of parental authority. And then, the final blow. I found out they had lied to our aunt, Sarah's new guardian, telling her that Sarah had chosen to move out, that she wanted to live with her. It was a blatant manipulation, a cowardly attempt to save face and avoid responsibility for their actions. I was furious, disgusted, ashamed of them, ashamed of myself for not seeing it sooner, for not speaking up for Sarah when she needed me most. I felt like I was complicit in their betrayal, my silence a tacit endorsement of their actions. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't be a part of their charade any longer. I packed a bag, called Chris, and told him I was coming over. It was time to stand on my own 2 feet, to break free from the toxic environment that had allowed this injustice to happen. It was time to be a better sister, a better person, and it was time to face the truth about my family, no matter how painful it might be. Seeing Sarah's pain laid bare for all the world to see was a gut punch. It wasn't just the injustice of it all, it was the raw honesty in her words, the vulnerability that resonated with a part of me I had long suppressed. I saw myself in her story, the younger sibling always trying to measure up, to earn a love that seemed freely given to the other. I knew I had to do something. Staying silent, complicit in my parents' actions, was no longer an option. I messaged Sarah, my fingers trembling as I typed, unsure of how she would react. I simply said I wanted to talk, to understand, to apologize. To my relief, she agreed to meet. We chose a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop miles away from the battlefield of our childhood home. I arrived early, nerves churning in my stomach. What would I say? How could I possibly make amends for the years of silent complicity? When Sarah walked in, my heart ached. She looked thinner, her eyes shadowed with a sadness that went beyond her teenage years, but there was also a strength in her gaze, a newfound confidence that I had never seen before. The words tumbled out of me, a torrent of apologies and explanations. I told her I had no idea about their plan to kick her out, that I would have fought against it if I had known. I confessed that I had always been aware of the unfairness, the favoritism, but that I had been too cowardly to speak up, too afraid of rocking the boat, of losing my own precarious position in the family. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I should have been a better sister. I should have protected you." Sarah listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "It's okay, Amanda," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I know you didn't ask for any of this, but it means a lot that you're here now, that you're finally seeing things from my perspective." We talked for hours that day, sharing stories, memories, and long-suppressed emotions. I learned about the challenges she had faced living with our aunt, the loneliness, the feeling of being adrift, the constant yearning for a family that truly loved and accepted her. I also learned about her strength, her resilience, and her determination to build a life for herself, despite the obstacles. She had blossomed in ways I never could have imagined, finding her own voice, her own path, her own sense of belonging. As the day drew to a close, I felt a renewed sense of connection to my sister, a bond forged not in shared experiences of favoritism, but in a shared understanding of the pain it had caused. We were no longer just sisters. We were allies, united in our desire to heal, to move forward, to create a future where love and support, not competition and resentment, defined our relationship. Leaving the coffee shop, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay, couldn't ignore the injustice that had been done. I had to take a stand, to make a choice, and so I called Chris and told him I was moving in with him. It was time to leave the nest, to break free from the toxic environment that had allowed this to happen. It was time to start a new chapter, one where I could be a better sister, a better daughter, and a better person. The CPS investigation was a nightmare. Social workers came to our house, interviewed us separately, and scrutinized every aspect of our parenting. I felt violated, exposed, like my entire life was being dissected under a microscope. Vicky was distraught, racked with guilt over what she had done. Lily, on the other hand, seemed strangely detached, almost relieved. It was as if she had finally found a way to exert some control, to make her voice heard, even if it meant tearing our family apart. I tried to be strong, to hold everything together. I reassured Vicky that it wasn't her fault, that it was just a misunderstanding. I tried to reason with Lily, to explain that her actions had consequences, that she was hurting everyone, including herself. But my words fell on deaf ears. Lily was adamant. She had made her statement, and she wasn't backing down. She accused me of favoritism, of neglecting her needs, of always prioritizing Vicky. I tried to defend myself, to explain that my actions, though perhaps misguided, were always motivated by love, but Lily wouldn't listen. She had built up a wall of resentment, a fortress of anger that I couldn't penetrate. The investigation dragged on for weeks, an agonizing period of uncertainty and stress. We were constantly on edge, waiting for the next phone call, the next visit, the next interrogation. The tension in the house was palpable, a thick fog of anxiety that permeated every interaction. Finally, the CPS concluded their investigation. They found no evidence of abuse or neglect, but they recommended family counseling to address the underlying issues that had led to Lily's report. I was relieved, but also exhausted. The ordeal had taken its toll on all of us. Vicky was withdrawn, her once bubbly personality dimmed by guilt and anxiety. Lily remained distant, her anger simmering just below the surface. And then, Lily made a decision that would change the course of our lives forever. She announced that she was moving in with my in-laws, that she couldn't live with us anymore, that she needed space. I was heartbroken. I pleaded with her to reconsider, to give us another chance, to work through our problems together. But she was adamant. She had made up her mind. I watched as she packed her bags, her movements deliberate, her face set in a mask of determination. I felt a part of me breaking, a piece of my heart being ripped away. Lily left, and the silence in her absence was deafening. The house felt empty, the laughter gone, the joy replaced by a hollow ache. I tried to reach out to her, to call, to text, to visit, but she rebuffed my every attempt. She had erected a wall between us, a wall I couldn't seem to scale. Years passed. Lily graduated high school, earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, and moved on with her life. We heard about her achievements through the grapevine, through mutual acquaintances, through social media posts that she never shared with us. I wanted to be happy for her, to celebrate her successes, but a part of me couldn't help but feel resentful, abandoned, betrayed. She had moved on, leaving us behind, carrying the scars of our fractured relationship like a badge of honor. The rift between us remained, a gaping wound that refused to heal. And as I watched her life unfold from a distance, I couldn't help but wonder if we would ever find our way back to each other, if we would ever be a family again. Years passed. Lily blossomed in her new environment, away from the shadow of her older sister and the stifling atmosphere of our home. She excelled in school, made new friends, and seemed to finally find her place in the world. We kept tabs on her through my in-laws, hearing snippets of her life, her achievements, her growing independence. Each phone call, each casual mention of Lily's accomplishments was a bittersweet reminder of the daughter who was thriving yet remained distant, a world away from the family she had left behind. A part of me was proud, of course, proud of the young woman she was becoming, proud of her resilience, proud of her ability to overcome the challenges she had faced. I would look at her photos, sent sporadically by my in-laws, and marvel at the confident young woman she had become. Her smile seemed genuine. Her eyes sparkled with a newfound sense of self-assurance. She was blossoming, and a part of me, the motherly part, rejoiced in her happiness. But there was also a lingering sadness, a sense of loss for the relationship we never had, the connection that had been severed by years of unintentional neglect and misunderstanding. I would often find myself daydreaming about Lily, imagining what it would be like to have her back in our lives, to share in her joys and sorrows, to be a mother to her in the way I had always yearned to be. Then came the news that shook me to my core. Lily was getting married. I was overjoyed, of course. My baby girl, all grown up and finding love. I immediately envisioned a beautiful wedding, a celebration of her happiness, a chance for our family to come together and heal the wounds of the past. I pictured myself helping her choose her dress, planning the reception, and sharing in the excitement and anticipation of her big day. But then, reality set in. Lily had built a life separate from us, a life where we were not a central part. She had created her own family, her own support system, her own definition of happiness. And I knew, with a sinking heart, that our presence at her wedding was not a given. The thought of not being there for her on such an important day filled me with a profound sense of sadness and regret. I had failed her as a mother, failed to nurture the bond between my daughters, and failed to create a family where both of them felt loved and valued. And now, I was facing the consequences of my actions. I wrestled with my emotions for days, unsure of how to proceed. Should I call her? Should I wait for her to reach out? Should I simply send a card and a gift, acknowledging her happiness from a distance? Finally, I gathered my courage and dialed her number. My voice trembled as I spoke, the years of distance and unspoken words hanging heavy between us. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up on each other's lives, the conversation tentative, the undercurrent of tension palpable. And then, I asked the question that had been weighing on my mind. Lily, sweetheart, we'd love to be there to celebrate your big day. Will Vicky be invited? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, bracing myself for the answer I knew was coming. Mom, Lily finally said, her voice soft but firm, Vicky and I don't have a relationship. I don't want her at my wedding. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was the confirmation I had dreaded, the acknowledgement that the rift between my daughters was deeper than I had realized. I had hoped that time and distance might have healed some of the wounds, but it seemed that the scars were still raw, the pain still fresh. I tried to reason with her, to appeal to her sense of family, to remind her that Vicky was her sister, that they shared a bond that couldn't be broken. But Lily was adamant. She had moved on, created a life without Vicky, and she wasn't willing to reopen old wounds. "Mom," she said, her voice laced with a hint of sadness, "I understand that you love Vicky, and I'm happy for her, but she hurt me, and I'm not ready to forgive her. I don't want her presence to overshadow my wedding day." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. My attempts to protect Vicky, to shield her from the consequences of her actions, had backfired. I had inadvertently created a chasm between my daughters, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. And then, Lily dropped another bombshell. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't want you and Dad to come to the wedding either." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt a surge of anger, a sense of betrayal. How could she do this to us? Didn't she understand the love we had for her, the sacrifices we had made? Didn't she realize that we were her parents, that we deserved to be there for her on such an important day? But the anger quickly subsided, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I realized that Lily's decision, though painful, was understandable. She had been hurt, neglected, and ultimately abandoned by the people who were supposed to love and protect her. And now, she was choosing to protect herself, to create a wedding day that was truly hers, free from the shadows of the past, free from the reminders of the family that had failed her. I hung up the phone, my heart heavy with regret. I had failed as a mother, failed to nurture the bond between my daughters, and failed to create a family where both of them felt loved and valued. And now, I was paying the price. I knew I couldn't force Lily to change her mind, to invite us to her wedding, but I also knew that I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I had to find a way to show her that I loved her, that I regretted my mistakes, and that I wanted to be a part of her life, even if it was from a distance. And so, I made a decision. I would send her a heartfelt letter, expressing my love, my regret, and my hope for a future where we could rebuild our relationship. I would tell her that I understood her decision, that I respected her boundaries, and that I would always be there for her, even if she never wanted to see me again. It was a small gesture, a drop in the ocean of hurt and resentment that had accumulated over the years. But that was all I could do. And as I sealed the envelope and sent it on its way, I prayed that it would reach Lily's heart, that it would plant a seed of hope for a future where our family could finally heal and find peace. Leaving that coffee shop, the crisp autumn air felt different somehow, like I could breathe deeper, stand taller. I had faced my sister, my own complicity, and the truth, however ugly, had set something free inside me. Calling Chris to tell him I was moving in was both terrifying and exhilarating. This was it. No more hiding behind my parents, no more pretending I didn't see the cracks in our family foundation. It was time to build my own foundation, with Chris, with our baby, with a newfound sense of self. And maybe, just maybe, with Sarah too. My parents, predictably, went ballistic. My mom cried, my dad yelled, both accusing me of betrayal, of ingratitude, of siding with Sarah against them. "After all we've done for you," they shouted, their voices echoing through the phone, laced with a bitterness I had never heard before. But their words didn't sting the way they used to. Seeing Sarah's pain, acknowledging my own role in it, had shifted something inside me. Their anger felt hollow, their accusations misplaced. It was as if their love was conditional, dependent on my obedience and compliance. "You kicked your own daughter out on her birthday," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You lied to Aunt Susan. You manipulated everyone. And you expect me to be grateful? To just pretend everything's okay?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I knew they were reeling, not just from my defiance, but from the crumbling of their carefully constructed family facade. The whispers had become shouts, the cracks had become chasms, and they were powerless to stop it. The fallout was swift and brutal. My grandparents, staunch traditionalists who valued obedience above all else, threatened to cut my parents off financially if they didn't fix the situation with Sarah. Suddenly, the focus shifted from Sarah's well-being to the potential loss of inheritance. It was sickening to watch, their love for their children measured in dollar signs. My parents, caught between their pride and their wallets, tried to pressure Sarah into coming home, into apologizing, into pretending that none of this had ever happened. But Sarah, to her credit, refused to back down. She had found a safe haven with our aunt, a place where she felt loved and accepted for who she was. She had found her voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The tension escalated, with lawyers getting involved, accusations flying, and threats being thrown around like confetti. I tried to stay out of it, to focus on my own little family, but the drama was inescapable. It was like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. In the end, my parents, faced with the prospect of losing their financial security, made a calculated decision. They agreed to relinquish custody of Sarah, allowing Aunt Susan to become her legal guardian. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a public admission of their failure as parents. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Sarah was finally free from their toxic influence, that she had found a loving home with our aunt. Sadness that our family, once a source of comfort and belonging, was now fractured beyond repair. But there was also a sense of hope, a glimmer of possibility. Sarah and I were rebuilding our relationship. Slowly but surely, we talked on the phone, visited each other when we could, and shared the joys and challenges of our new lives. We were sisters, finally, in a way we had never been before. We were equals, bound by a shared understanding of the pain we had endured, the resilience we had discovered. And as I looked at my newborn son, his tiny hand grasping my finger, I vowed to break the cycle of favoritism, to create a family where love and acceptance were freely given, where every child felt valued and cherished. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to do better, to be better, because in the end, family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love, support, and the unwavering belief in each other's potential. The road ahead was long, and the wounds of the past would take time to heal. But I was no longer the naive, compliant daughter, blind to the injustices within my own family. I had found my voice, my strength, and my own sense of justice. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within my soul, that I would never again allow anyone, not even my own parents, to diminish the worth of another human being, especially not my sister. Story 2. My mother threw me out to concentrate on her new children. This is their story. Now I am successful. She wants me to pay for siblings. University. Hello, everyone. Before we delve in, a little favor. Please click the subscribe button if you appreciate materials like this. It's free, helps the channel, and guarantees you never miss incredible videos. All right, let's get going. Hey, everybody. I've been sitting on this for some time, and I believe it's time to at last release it. I honestly just need to get it off my chest. It's been eating at me. Context counts, hence I am starting right from the beginning. Currently working in senior management for a company I have been with since graduation. I am 33. Even now, though I have worked assiduously to achieve where I am, there is a part of me that looks back and wonders what life could have been like if my mother had chosen differently. She had me 20 years ago. Not shown in the image was my biological dad. Really, I know very little about him. From what she shared with me later, she offered him the choice to stay, and he ran without thinking twice. Not a child support system exists. No battles. Recently left. Above my grandparents' garage, we occupied this small flat. Not too much, but it worked. Basically, my grandparents carried her through that period. They supported her through her physical therapy degree acquisition and school completion process. She balanced parenting me on her own with her job and education. She has credit from me. She did not merely sit about lamenting her single mother status. She put much effort into it. Early on, those years were not horrible. Money was tight, sure, but I didn't see it. I stayed with my grandparents a lot of the time while she was either working or studying. My grandfather delighted in having me around. To be honest, throughout those years, he most likely did more for me than anybody else. When she could, my mother would still set aside time for me. Before bed, she read to me. She brought me to the park, such kind of stuff. Things changed approximately 8 years old. At her work, my mother ran across Leonard. At first, he appeared all okay. Normal man, steady employment. She said, I recall, how unlike he was from the guy she had dated before. Their dating lasted for some time, and they married a few years later, when I was about 11. Leonard was not a nasty man, but he was not friendly either. He seemed almost aloof but polite, though he didn't really try to connect either. He was not nasty to me or anything. He treated me as though I were merely a part of the furniture. Not very much changed at first. Now, Leonard, I was still living with my mother. It worked out perfectly. Not too good, but okay. Little things began to change then. My mother began giving Leonard and their life together more of her attention. Dinners grew more quiet, more about them than about myself. I recall being brushed aside as though I wasn't even there, trying to join in the conversation. I didn't take it personally at first. She seemed to me simply eager about her new marriage and wanting to make it work. But as time went on, it became evident that I was progressively being pushed out of the picture. I aimed more at grabbing their attention. I helped around the house, got home decent marks, and worked hard in school. Anything to demonstrate still had value. Then, about 12 years old, my mother became pregnant, twinned. Everybody felt great. 2, at least initially, was my number. Being the cool older brother, helping out with the babies, teaching them stuff, and simply hanging about this new family appealed to me. To practice before the twins arrived, I even began watching Neighbors. But as her pregnancy progressed, my mother's attitude toward me became even more. She seemed to be out of time for me now. Everything was centered on the twins. I reasoned it was only transient. Things would return to normal, as they did at birth. The twins arrived, and it was as though I disappeared overnight. Surely, I understand. They are newborns, and newborns want continual attention and care, not expecting things to remain exactly the same. Still, this was on another level. It was not only about her being weary or busy. That would have made sense. She stopped noticing me completely, as if family meals, those were relics of the past. She used to be the one arranging them, trying to give us some time together. Right now, though, nothing. It also involved more than just missing dinners. Little things that helped me to feel close to her vanished. Regarding our day of work, viewing a program together, even distributing those arbitrary inside jokes we used to have. The worst aspect, in my opinion, was my persistent striving. Even though it was obvious I belonged not to this new family dynamic, I still attempted. I still tried to be helpful, volunteered, and worked hard in class. Still, it made no difference whatever I did. I lost importance now. By the time I turned 16, everything was boiling. One evening, my mother and Leonard invited me into the living room, saying they wanted a serious chat. I knew it was not going to be good. I sensed it hovering in the atmosphere. They sat me down and began outlining the twins' financial situation's tightness. They said their bills had increased and they were unable to pay for everyone in the house going forward. Leonard spoke much of the time, setting out all the figures as I was meant to feel guilty about them. My mother simply sat there staring at me before uttering something I will never remember. They have more right, not rather. We shall work things out. Nothing. We occupy this jointly. Simply a clear statement that I was useless to them. I kept quiet. For what reason was this important? I headed to my room, packed barely. I left the door carrying clothes and a few personal items. I looked forward only. I never turned around. I went straight to my grandparents' place. They were not slow to accept me. But, oh, were they insane? While my grandma only shook her head and gave me a warm hug, my grandfather kept pacing and murmuring under his breath about how he couldn't believe his daughter would act. They wanted to face my mother, but they also wanted to avoid totally isolating her, mostly due to the twins. And I understood it. In all of this, the twins were innocent. They most certainly did not ask to be the center of my mother's world at my expense. They also did not ask to be born. Though I was furious at the circumstances, I couldn't blame them. For me, that day marked a turning point. That was the day I came to see I couldn't depend on my mother anymore. At 16, I was more than just a teenager learning about life. I was solo. It was unsettling. Sure, but I was without options. I realized then and there that I had to look after myself since nobody else was going to. While it was relieving, living with my grandparents wasn't easy. They provided a place to stay and a roof over my head, but they couldn't help much beyond that. Retired, on a fixed income, they simply lacked the means to help me the way I required. I so began my employment. I worked at this neighborhood coffee shop originally. Though it wasn't glamorous, it paid just enough for me to buy clothes, school supplies, and some of the things I needed to survive high school. Still, juggling job and education proved challenging. I would try to do homework, get home late, and wake early the next day to do it all over once more. Though I dropped a little, I stayed on target to graduate. That my mother hardly checked in at all was what truly pained. For her, it was as though I had stopped existing. Every now and then, family rumors would bring me references to her and Leonard. Of course, they were doing nicely. The twins were living their picture-perfect life in their magnificent house with their new automobiles. They were flourishing. And really, I couldn't make sense of it. Two folks working good jobs couldn't afford 3 children, and I'm not sure why. I was not some ostentatious expenditure. All I needed was the foundations. I was the one suffering in the meantime. Just to survive, I was working weekends and late into school evenings. Trying to have any kind of a normal life while juggling homework shifts was taxing. It was not as though I was expecting anything from them, just a little work and some thought. But the second I left that door, it felt like they went back to their pristine little bubble after washing their hands clean of me. I suppose it wasn't particularly about the costs. Simply said, they wanted me no longer. About my last year as a senior, starting to come in were college acceptance letters. Though afraid as well, I was thrilled. On my own, I realized I could not afford college. I was in need of assistance. Against better taste, I therefore contacted my mother. I recall late at night sitting in my grandparents' kitchen with my phone in hand, trying to decide how to phrase the text. My head kept whirling with several approaches to seek assistance without coming off as very needy. At least 10 times I deleted and rebuilt it before emailing. Hey, I have several colleges that accepted me. I was wondering whether you could co-sign or assist with financial aid applications. I sent it and quickly came to regret it. Not because I felt it improper to inquire, but more because deep down, I already knew the solution. Still, a small dumb bit of me kept hope. She might also remember me as her child. Her response arrived hours later, and when it did, my appetite vanished. Our savings are for the twins' future. We are unable to intervene. Apologies. That summed it up. Not a number. Good luck. Not sure. We commend you. Simply a flat denial. Though it shouldn't have startled me, it did. Alternatively, it might simply hurt more than I cared to admit. I glanced at the note, trying to understand how someone could shut down their own child in such a manner. Not even regarding the money, was it? It was a total lack of attention. Feeling like a moron, I sat there wondering why I had bothered at all. I realized I could not rely on her. I set down my phone and tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but the tears flowed anyway. I had no resentment against the twins. They didn't ask for this, but I couldn't help but feel as though I had been thrown aside, like I didn't really matter. Fortunately, once I told my aunt what occurred, she intervened. She had no hesitation at all. "I'll co-sign your loans," she added, staring me squarely in the eye. "You simply pay attention to make this work." She was not obliged to do it. She thought of me even though she had kids to care about and her own obligations. She said she always knew I had the ability to travel great distances. To be honest, that belief really struck more powerfully than the offer itself. I promised myself at that exact moment, I wouldn't let her down. I would work tirelessly. Not only for me, but also to show her faith in me was not unfounded. While my aunt flung the door wide open, and I wasn't about to squander the opportunity, my mother might have slammed it closed. It was not a joke. College. To survive, I worked nonstop on campus jobs, weekend shifts, and side gigs. I even began freelancing for small companies and taught myself web design. I had bills to pay, and the work paid nicely, though I couldn't afford it. Sleep started to seem like a luxury. Not important. There was nothing going to stop my mother and me from reaching our target. Still radio silence. Not one book or call to follow up. Every now and again, I'd stumble across her social media revisions, images of the twins at their school plays, their birthdays, or their family holidays to Disneyland. She looked so carefree, like her life was this ideal little bubble. Those posts felt like a dagger directly to my chest, so eventually I blocked her. I couldn't keep tormenting myself by staring at a life I wasn't part of. When graduation finally rolled around, I sent my aunt an invite to the ceremony. She didn't just come. She was beaming in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else when my name was called. My mom. I didn't even bother asking her if she didn't care about my education when I needed her support the most. She didn't deserve to be there celebrating my accomplishment. My aunt, though, she deserved every bit of that moment. Because without her, I might not have made it at all. After graduation, the real grind started. I moved to a small city in search of work in a related field. Though not very good, the salary was sufficient to pay my bills and begin to chip away at my student loans. Those first few years were trying. working long hours to establish myself, was living in a small apartment with horrible furniture. I gave that work all I had. I seized every chance for education, stayed late to complete projects, and offered to help with chores nobody else desired. It began to pay off gradually, though. I received a promotion, then still another, and I was up the ladder before I knew it. I was at last in a good place by the time I entered my late 20s. I had upgraded to a respectable apartment, paid off a sizable portion of my loans, and saved some money for the first time in my life. I thought I was at last catching up. My relationship with my mother remained nil. She didn't, and I didn't either go out of my way to get in touch with her. Relatives occasionally told me she asked about me, but it never resulted in anything. I led my life. She had her family. Realizing she wouldn't be changing seemed to be the toughest challenge of those years. Part of me had always hoped she would reach out with apologies, or at least admit how she treated me. But it never happened. Rather, I came to quit looking for anything from her. By 30, fast forward, I was in senior management, earning more than I had ever imagined. Though I didn't post about it online, I kept it quiet and didn't inform most of my family. Though my aunt, the one co-signing my loans, was the only person aware of my promotion, I wanted to avoid dealing with the turmoil that would follow. Every time we spoke, she told me she was proud of me. She sadly conveyed it to my mother informally at a family get-together, hoping it might cause some sort of reconciliation. She intended right. She had always been the one attempting to keep the peace. But one comment started a domino effect I wasn't prepared for. A knock on my door a few days later. Not expecting anyone, I searched among the individuals. My mother and Leonard were there. I hadn't seen them in years, and I couldn't find one single decent reason for them to be standing on my front porch. I unlocked the door, but I didn't move to let them in. What is going on? I probed. Leonard paid no attention to Nietzsche's. We have to talk, he continued, pushing his way past me as though he owned the area. My mother followed him in without hardly a greeting. We had heard of your promotion, Leonard began with a crisp, matter-of-fact tone. You are so at last acting with yourself. Great for you. Concerning time. Absolutely. I turned to look at them, not celebrating. After all these straight-to insults, no small conversation. All right, I said slowly. Mom interrupted right away. The twins will shortly be beginning college, and we have had a little financial crisis. We reasoned that since you're doing so well right now, you could assist with their costs. Though I can't recall my response back then, I know all I did was try to make sense of it. Years of silence, years of everything they had put me through. They had the arrogance to show up at my home and demand money. Are you indeed serious? At last I muttered. Why wouldn't we be as well? Leonard responded with a blast. Are you not making decent money right now? Act not as though you cannot afford it. You don't have children. You have no family here to look after. You possess the wealth. It's not about whether I can afford it. My voice rising, I said. It's about the fact that for me, you two have done absolutely nothing. And right now, you're here requesting a handout, like I owe you something. Mom started to roll her eyes. Oh, she said, flinging her hands up here. Are you going to once more act the victim? Poor you. We hardly catered to you sufficiently. For years, you have been clinging to this grudge. And in what regard? Looking at you, you performed rather well. Sure, since I worked so hard, I snapped without consulting either of you. Do you know how difficult it was to negotiate college without a cosigner? Without any financial support? I made it happen, but not because of you. In spite of you. Leonard smirked. Oh, come on. Give off behaving as though your life had been so difficult. You currently have a good job. Do you not? A decent location to call home. You need to be thanking us. Should we not have driven you out? You would not be where you are right now, appreciating it. My voice quivering with rage. I said I was not convenient longer. Hence you threw me aside. You made it plain that I was not important to you. And now you're here, hoping me to fly in and save the day for the children you really loved? No, obviously not. Mom's voice became cold. She shot back, saying, You're selfish. I reared you on my own. To keep you alive, worked assiduously. To provide you all you required. And right now, look at you. You have everything you might possibly need. And all we're asking for is a small assist. There, your two siblings. You owe them rather a lot, after everything I've done for you. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Like I should feel sorry for not immediately bending over sideways for her and the twins. I don't owe them anything, I shot back, and I definitely don't owe either of you. You made your choices, and I made mine. You decided I wasn't worth your time or money, and now you're expecting me to put my life on hold for them? That's not happening. Leonard drew forward, his face steely. You know what your issue is? You have always believed you to be more valuable than you really are. Simply because you made it out on your own, you believe you are superior to everyone else. But let me tell you something. Then you meant nothing to this family. And right now you mean nothing. That strike was really terrible. Still, I refuse to let it show. What then are you here for? If I mean nothing to you, why are you standing in my living room begging for money? I asked coldly. Mom interrupted. Since we did not want to come here, do you suppose we love having you assist us? The twins, though, have a future. And you would see that if you weren't so damn national. Not yet, though. Playing the injured child consumes too much time for you to help anyone else except yourself. I groaned angrily. You want to discuss selfish behavior? To create space for your actual family? You ejected your own child from the house. I was not worth the work, you informed me. You now want to stand here and discuss what the twins deserve? They ought to have better parents. That is not of concern to me. Leonard's voice increasing, he pointed a finger at me. You should really pay closer attention to your mouth. Whether or not you like it, we are still your family. And family aids family? Not sure, I answered strongly. Family does not act the way you did to me. Family does not discard its child like garbage and then come crawling back when they are broke. You belong not to my family. For me, you are strangers. Mom's face grew twisted with wrath. Nice. Be a little brat with selfishness. But when your life collapses, do not come to us begging. You believe you surpass us much, yet you are nothing. You will never be anything. That summed it up. Enough had been spoken. If you're not leaving right now, I said as I reached for my phone, I have the police on my call. Leonard laughed disdainfully. Go ahead and give them calls. See how that appears? Tossing your own parents from your house. Not among my parents, are you? My finger hanging over the screen. I answered coolly. Not nowadays. Mom took his arm and murmured something beneath her breath. She whispered as they turned to go. You will regret this, I answered, closing the door behind them. No, I'm not. That was the flashpoint when I became aware of my changes. The child who yearned for their acceptance vanished. I owed them nothing. Hence, I wouldn't allow guilt to force me to see differently. I stayed in my living room, phone still in hand, and just watched them go. I'm not offended. I no longer felt even somewhat annoyed. I ran out of energy. I had buried deep, yearned for years, that one day they may view me as their son, their family, someone who cared. Still, that hope seemed lost. That showdown shut any last traces of my delusions about them. That day, I assumed I would have seen them last. I was ready to go on. I had made it plain they were not welcome in my life. People like them, however, do not accept no as the response. Their attempts to claw their way back in were fruitful. And what came next was anarchy. 2 weeks later, I discovered via colleagues that my mother had visited my workplace. I was absent. I had taken a sick day, but she supposedly started quite the scene. She marched in, insisted on talking to me, and stayed put when told I wasn't there. She was yelling about family and sacrifices and her due regard. One of my colleagues mentioned the following day security had to take her out. It was very strong. I'm sorry to everyone. And one repressed. I checked to make sure HR knew and instructed them to include her among the list of persons forbidden from the grounds. Still, I trembled. Her stooping that low astounded me. Still to come, though, was the worst. My mother did not back off. About a week later, one evening, after leaving work, I discovered her waiting for me outside my house. She was obviously upset as she was pacing the driveway. She raced over and said, "You cannot keep ignoring me." As soon as I got out of my car, she gasped. Keeping my distance, I inhaled deeply. "For what reason are you here?" "We have to talk," she said, pointing her finger at me like I was a small child. "You believe you could simply walk away from your family based on your duties?" "What obligations? I rebuff you. Not me, you are the parent here. Your offspring are the twins. Not me, you are the one meant to sort things out." That started her off. She began to yell about my selfishness and unappreciativeness, how I owed her for all she had done for me. "I gave you so much, sacrificed," she screamed. "And this is your repayment method? By cutting your back on us. You gave nothing up for me. Trying to keep my voice steady, I said, Mom, go back to your house from which you kicked your kid and avoid showing up once more. Her voice then changed from loud to basically hysterical. She began screaming so loudly that neighbors emerged from their homes to investigate what was happening. He's bratty, she shrieked and gestured violently at me. He's always been a self-serving little brat. He only thinks of himself. She wasn't hearing it even though a few neighbors tried to step in and advise her to cool off. Her voice got louder, more agitated, until she screamed and lunged at me. After everything I have done for you, hold back, I cautioned, my phone in hand as I began to dial 911. Mom, really? Don't you dare. Her face turned red with fury. She grabbed my phone wildly as well. Mother, you dare phone the cops on your own. I brought you up. For you, I gave it all up. You let go of me. Trying to keep her away, I yelled back while holding my phone out of her grasp. You discard me as though I were nothing. I felt as though my argument with my mother had changed in nature. It resembled seeing a stranger don her face. Still trying to get the phone from my hands, she was screaming about ingratitude and about family loyalty while lunging at me. I heard one of my neighbors screaming among the turmoil, I'm dialing the cops. Let him be by himself. From their homes, more neighbors began to show up on porches or edging near, observing this dreamlike scenario of a mother violently pursuing her own child. At last, someone intervened and drew her apart from me. Just as sirens sliced across the air, she battled them, still screaming something incomprehensible. Still, the moment ended. I stood there shaking as the police car's flashing lights covered the street, understanding how far she had traveled and how much I could not let her back into my life. I reported straight to the police station the following morning. I broke everything out for you. The workplace incident, her showing up at my house, the screaming contest before my neighbors. The policeman I spoke with was understanding and guided me in beginning the application process for a restraining order. My grandparents were incensed when I told them what had happened. She is mentally insane. Shaking his head, my grandfather said, She doesn't seem wrong to me, but you don't deserve this. For you back then, we ought to have done more. Grandma chimed in, her voice weighed with guilt. We thought we were helping by staying close, but we let you face too much on your own. I'm so sorry. I told them it wasn't their fault. They'd done the best they could, and they were the only reason I'd had any kind of stability after my mom kicked me out. They made it clear they were done with her. We've stood by her through everything my grandpa said, but this is the last straw. We're cutting ties. Hearing that was bittersweet. On one hand, it felt like validation. They finally saw her for who she was. But on the other hand, it stung to know how far she'd fallen and how little she'd cared about anyone but herself. The restraining order was obtained a few weeks later, and life finally started to settle down. I threw myself into my profession, my house, and the people that genuinely mattered. My grandparents, my aunt, and my close acquaintances. My aunt, yet she was my rock. She didn't only step in when things became hard, she stayed, and she never made me feel like I owed her anything for it. A few months later, after I'd finally gathered my breath, I resolved to do something for her. It wasn't about repaying her. It was about showing her how much she mattered to me. I didn't just hand her money. I planned it out. I checked to be sure it would cover her family's weekend trip. She was constantly putting others first, so something she would have always fantasized about, but never given first priority. She first seemed perplexed when I handed her the envelope, then opened it and gasped. This is what is happening. Her voice fluttered as she asked. For you is this, I said rather plainly. You have always stood by me. You were not obliged, of course. You did, however. You are worthy of anything decent. Something simply for you. She shook her head and her tears filled up. You were free not to do this. I wanted something in return. Hence, I didn't aid you. I know, I murmured, my voice choked with feeling. You thereby merit it even more. She gave me a firm hug, and for the first time in years, I felt the kind of love and encouragement I had spent my entire life pursuing. She saw me, but also more than that. She regarded me. Every now and then, though, I would hear fragments about my mom and Leonard. The twins were hardly surviving college, and their financial condition was collapsing. I felt not guilty. I experienced nothing. I had made mine. They had made their decisions. I had carried the weight of seeking their approval, hoping they would at last view me as someone who mattered for years. But now I realized, not at all. and that was good as well. Their approval was not needed by me. I came to see my own value. Now, I surrounded myself with others who also did too. I lead a life I'm happy with, surrounded by individuals who really do care about me. Most significantly, though, I now know that family isn't defined by blood. It's characterized by the people who show up, stand by you, and love you for who you are, not by what they might get from you. Regarding my mother, I hope she discovers whatever it is she is seeking. I am done, though, acting as her answer. I'm finished making her sacrifice. Right now, my life is mine. I am not looking behind. Should anything fresh arise, I will post a revision for you folks. Last revision, hi all. Though I never intended to be writing a piece, something unanticipated happened, and I feel it is worth discussing. After all that went down with my mom and Leonard, the restraining order, the ambush outside my house, and her meltdown, I felt I was done with that portion of my life. I closed the door and continued, then one of the twins stretched out. It began with an unidentified numbers text. Hey Max, is it? Can we have a conversation? I should get to know you. I hardly know you. You are my brother. I sat there staring at the message for a protracted while. After I left home all those years ago, Max and I hardly knew one another. Little children at the time, the twins lost touch with each other following all my mom and Leonard went through. Though part of me questioned whether this was some fresh tactic by my mother, Max's message seemed to have a different resonance. Gradually, I answered, "What is this about?" A short while later, he phoned. I paused before picking up. "Hey," he said, his voice a touch tense. Though I wanted to get in touch, I knew this was odd. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately and believe I overlooked something vital. I know nothing about your brother. You are mine." I regret not saying more. He continued talking. "What mom and dad did to you is known." He said, "When I was young, I didn't know it. However, I do now." I disagree. It wasn't right. To be honest, it was appalling. I detest that their decisions prevented us from establishing a relationship. Not that you left. That speaks of them, not of you. His comments threw me off balance. He was extremely frank about the matter. Not what I would have expected. "Max, none of this was your responsibility." Trying to keep my voice steady, I said, "You chose differently from what others did." "I know," he responded, "but it doesn't make things any easier. Having an older brother seems like something I missed. Now that I'm old enough to see everything, I want to at least try to make things right. Though I know I can't change what they've done, if you're game, I would want to get to know you." Not sure what to say, I slanted back in my chair. I had carried the weight of feeling as though my family didn't really care for years. But here Max was reaching out, owning what had happened, and requesting an opportunity to create something different. "Just now?" I probed. "Why now after all this time? Reach out?" "To be honest," he said, "since I want us to never be strangers. I'm not trying to justify mom or dad. I'm not asking you to pardon them either. Just now, you are someone I desire to know. That is it." His voice seemed quite sincere. Not feeling a bit moved was difficult. I have spent a lot of time trying to get beyond all of this. Last but not least, opening the door again is not easy for me. He said, "I understand. I am not requesting something really grand either. I only want an opportunity to chat with you, perhaps to see whether we could have some kind of connection. You are my brother. I would like to know you." I paused there to consider my alternatives. Regarding what happened, the twins had no bearing. They did not make choices that split our family. And maybe it was worth meeting Max halfway if he was trying to get in touch. Part of me kept telling me maybe his only goal is to use me. Since I don't know the twin yet, I decided to give him a chance nevertheless. "All right," I said. "We may begin with a talk." He clearly needed relief. "Thank you," he answered rapidly. "That is all I am asking. I just want to start someplace." We hung up soon after, and I pondered about it all evening. I never anticipated Max reaching out, and it left me with mixed feelings I couldn't quite sort through. The reality is, Max helped me realize the twins were as much victims of Mom and Leonard's selfishness as I was. I had spent so long seeing the twins as part of the family that had set me aside. They prefer this less than I did. Where this will lead is unknown. I am still wary. I'm not ready to rehash past hurts. I have a life I'm happy with. Max's effort seems sincere at the same time, though he avoided trying to guilt me or defend his parents. He wanted just to know me. and for the first time, I feel as though I might perhaps develop a relationship with someone from that side of the family. Though it's little, it feels like improvement.
Story 3.
I sold my apartment to help our family hotel stay out of bankruptcy, but my parents announced my brother as CEO during the staff conference. I therefore called them, and they were shocked. Hello, everyone. Before we jump right in, a quick favor. Please click the subscribe button if you find material like this appealing. The cost is free, supports the channel, and reminds you never to miss incredible videos. All right, let's get going. Hey, everybody! I have been waiting on this for some time. I feel as if I simply need to get it all out. Thus, here is what is happening. My 42-year-old female family runs a little mountain hotel. The family has owned it since my grandparents built it in the 1970s. Growing up, I spent a lot of time there assisting with simple tasks, including supply organization or check-ins. Not some elegant chain hotel here. It's more like a small lodge where folks visit for a relaxing weekend away or hiking excursions. Anyway, after my grandparents retired, my folks took over. Let's say business was not their thing. The building got run down over time, reviews sank, bookings plummeted, and they kept duct tape and prayer fixing things. They didn't. I suppose they expected things would suddenly change around. My dad phoned me a little over a year ago, sounding more agitated than I have ever heard him. According to him, the hotel was about to fail. Losing it would have meant losing not just our family heritage, but also our livelihood, since my parents had attempted to pour everything into it. I am not going to lie. At first, I hesitated. In Portland, I led a nice life. Years of working in hospitality had helped me to advance to a managerial post from which I felt pride. Along with my own apartment, a circle of friends, and a steady schedule, I had, what are you meant to do, though, when your parents phone stating they are weeks away from losing everything? I sold my flat right away, quit my work, and loaded everything into my car. I reasoned that it would only be transient. A few months to assist with stabilization, then back into my life. The state of affairs when I returned home was far worse than I could have imagined. The hotel was hardly operational. The furniture appeared to have been taken from a thrift store. The carpets were discolored, and everything smelled mildly like mildew. Visitors were grumbling about unpleasant staff, noisy plumbing, and malfunctioning air conditioning equipment. Though I had always known the place was antiquated, I had not realized just how awful things had become. Too were the finances a shambles. In a shoebox, my dad handed me a stack of invoices, receipts, and bank statements, as though I could just wave a magic wand and make everything clear. There were delinquent suppliers, past due bills, and non-evenly reconciling accounts. Said the least, it was daunting. I lacked time to consider how horrible things were, though. I just started working and accepted complete responsibility. First, I addressed the reservation system, which was so antiquated it could hardly process internet bookings. Though it was required, I upgraded it to something current, which was far more costly than I had anticipated. I next went on to the practical tasks, changing the lobby furnishings, repainting the walls, repairing faulty faucets, and substituting light fixtures. With a limited budget, I used imaginative scouring, clearance sales, and local supplier negotiation. Every day, I spent hours with the workers working to retrain them and foster some professionalism. Most of them lacked even poor work ethics. They had just lacked appropriate direction in years. To ensure everyone was in agreement, I created checklists, defined expectations, and began calling frequent meetings. While some individuals stopped when they saw I wasn't playing about, the ones that stayed turned out to be my most ardent fans. Another mess was marketing. The hotel hardly had any presence on social media either. I created everything from the ground up. Instagram is one more. Facebook, the writings. I began uploading pictures of the renovations, advertising local attractions to entice visitors, and running special discounts. I contacted bloggers and travel vultures, providing free stays in return for reviews. Though it took time, we began to receive bookings practically right away. To be honest, the first several months passed in a haze. I worked 12 or 14 hours a day occasionally. Eating microwave dinners, I would crash in one of the vacant rooms at night, looking at spreadsheets until I lost vision. Every time my pals from Portland texted me asking how I was doing, I responded the same way. That's good. Just lazy. Though I didn't want to say how utterly worn out and overwhelmed I felt, little by little, things started to turn around. As guests noted the changes, we began to obtain better internet reviews. The staff clearly showed more organization, confidence, and clarity. It felt like a little victory since even my parents appeared more hopeful. About 8 months in, I at last felt like we were out of the danger zone after months of witnessing them so anxious and demoralized. For the first time in years, the hotel was making money. Fixing systems, enhancing the guest experience, and getting the location back on the map had taken me innumerable hours. Though it wasn't flawless, it was steady, and that felt like a major victory. I thus entered the room humming with expectation when my parents summoned a staff meeting. The night before making a presentation, I had worked on colorful charts and before and after pictures of every improvement we had done. I even worked on a few sentences to praise the staff for their diligence. I saw cheers, smiles, perhaps even a toast to our accomplishment. Rather, my dad got up and cleared his throat in that uncomfortable, purposeful manner he always used before uttering anything he knew wouldn't go over well. Though my heart sank somewhat, I urged myself not to obsess over it. Perhaps all they wanted to discuss was future directions. He then said it. It gives us great pleasure to inform you Tyler will be replacing the CEO to lead the hotel into its future. I dug into my hand and froze the margins of my painstakingly created presentation folder. Tyler CEO. I have to admit I missed. Allow me to graphically depict my brother Tyler. Although he is 3 years my junior, his maturity could be decades behind mine. As I was in college learning hospitality, working double shifts at the college hotel, and staying late to finish group tasks, Tyler was committing nothing, but was experimenting with everything. He became completely fixated on photography one month, capturing melancholy images of vacant parking lots and streetlights. He then was creating t-shirts for a clothes line that never made the notebook stage. Not ambition was what drove it. More like dreaming with a dash of illusion. Once in a rare occasion, he would wander into the hotel and make a vague recommendation like, "You know what? There needs to be a juice bar here." Then you disappear once more, off on his next brief fixation. And now this man, the same one who couldn't even log into the reservation system, was going to be the hotel's CEO. I had invested money, work, and savings into preservation. My dad's comments sank in and drowned out the staff's whispers of surprise from all around me. My ears ring. My perfectly created presentation felt like a cruel joke at first. I simply sat there in shock. Beyond stating Tyler has natural leadership ability, my parents did not even try to defend their choice. He came with it from birth. My mother said something like that. Various. Like his total lack of experience, it was a strength somehow. Of course, with that arrogant smile he always wears, Tyler arrived late for the meeting and assured Casey not to worry. You shine in the operational area. I shall concentrate on the overall image. I don't believe I have ever felt so discounted in my life. Though I wanted to argue that I had given up my life in Portland to save this site, I didn't. I nodded and grinned while the staff clapped haltingly. I lingered late in the office that evening, glancing at the books and questioning why I even bothered. It felt like none of it mattered. I had worked so hard to get the hotel back up and running. Already my parents had chosen which was more vital. Though at the time I didn't realize it, that conference marked the start of something more than I could have imagined. When I look back today, I can clearly see how much that influenced what followed. But all I could feel at that very moment was a great sense of betrayal and irritation. It seemed as though all I had worked for had been handed to someone undeserving of it. Did the days following the staff conference blur? I carried on the motions since, well, what else was I meant to do? But I am not a liar. It experienced different. Like the local air had altered. Still acting as though nothing was wrong were my parents. I suppose Tyler was walking about like he owned the house, which he certainly did now. And the employees began to sense the unusual energy. I kept reminding myself I simply needed time to get used to things. Perhaps Tyler truly has some kind of broad picture vision that I was not yet experiencing, given that he had to, right? Why else would my parents designate him as in charge? Still, it took me some time to come to see that that wasn't the reality. Tyler's definition of leadership proved to be, very frankly, not very good. Wearing sunglasses and carrying a smoothie, he entered the workplace mid-morning on his first day and stated, "Well, so, first order of business. Our long-term creative agenda is what?" For a moment, I looked at him, waiting for him to chuckle or provide some sort of hint he was kidding. He omitted. "Tyler, We just completed updating every significant system. The next phase is emphasizing staff consistency and preservation of those improvements. He nodded as though he were really lost in contemplation, then remarked, "Cool, great. But regarding, say, branding, should we be aiming for younger people? Gen Z seems to be all about experiences, I believe I read somewhere. Though I'm not sure why that moment stayed with me so strongly, it seemed to be the ideal portrait of Tyler's style. Many nebulous phrases, no real direction, and practically no knowledge of how daily operations really ran. Things grew worse from there. Cutting the complimentary breakfast, one of our best-rated perks, was his first significant adjustment. Visitors found it to be great. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee, all that. Tyler substituted a self-serve coffee stand and a basket of granola bars since he felt it was too costly. He brushed me off and stated, "It's not about what people want." When I tried to explain how much this would influence visitor pleasure, it relates to their needs. One week we began receiving complaints. Years of regular guests were leaving negative reviews claiming the hotel lost appeal and was cutting corners. One woman even remarked, "I come here every winter because it seems like home. It feels like a cheap motel right now." One wounded. Still, Tyler didn't give a damn. Making audacious decisions like firing Patricia, the head of housekeeping, he was too busy because she disagreed with his new calendar. Patricia had joined us 15 years ago. She taught practically all the housekeepers and knows every inch of the hotel. Losing her was a major setback to the squad. When I tried to step in and clarify our reliance on her, "Do you even know what you have done?" I missed. "We have been receiving 5-star cleaning ratings because of Patricia. She maintains this place in running order." Tyler waved aside my comments. "We need folks who are adaptable. Casa." When I brought up the guest reaction to the free breakfast, she showed no team player. Tyler's mother came to defend him. She said, "He's trying new things." Her voice cut like my own irrationality. One cannot expect things to start working immediately. Allow him some time. I had been the one handling furious emails and critiques all week, but apparently Tyler's vision took precedence over real performance. I intended to yell, "I sold my apartment to preserve this spot." "And you let him demolish it?" I knew, though, it would be ignored. Their naive confidence in Tyler was all they could see past. Still, this is the important point. The fallout was not being handled by Tyler. I was. We were low-staffed, so I was the one answering complaints from visitors when their rooms weren't ready on schedule. The one attempting to cool off the other housekeepers feeling overburdened and underappreciated was myself. Tyler once more. He was too preoccupied developing creative marketing plans to actually clean the mess he produced. And my parents. They did not help at all. Every time I tried to discuss what was happening with them, they simply advised Tyler to give himself some time to sort things out. This is new to him. That would be a wonderful justification for him running the place into the ground, my mother kept repeating. About 1 month after Tyler took control, everything came to a head. One morning, I came into the workplace and discovered him seated at my desk, munching a bagel while reading through his phone. "Hey, Casey," he stated without even turning to see. "Just a quick inquiry. Are we truly in need of a full maintenance staff? Most of this, I feel, could be outsourced." What I was hearing defied belief. Outsourcing would have been far more costly over time, and the maintenance crew was already taxed. Showing him the figures, I tried to explain this to him, but he simply shrugged and remarked, "Sometimes you had to spend money to save money." That was the instant I understood I could not continue. It mattered not how hard I worked or how much I tried to mend things. Now Tyler was in charge. My parents had made it abundantly evident they wouldn't be intervening. Though I'd mentally checked out, I couldn't just walk away since I was fighting a losing battle. Though it felt as though they cared less about it than I did, the hotel remained my family's legacy. I persisted in showing up every day, doing all I could to prevent total collapse. And then one day, things turned around. On the edge of town, I passed an old run-down building while returning from a supplier conference. Back then, it was a rival of ours still open. It was now simply empty, sitting there, with a fading for sale sign front and rear. Though I'm not sure why I stopped, I pulled into the parking lot and simply sat there staring at it. Though in rough form, the structure held promise. Closer to the main road and with breathtaking views of the valley, it was in a better spot than our motel. It was larger as well and offered enough room for improvements. I began to consider all the activities I would have wanted to do at the family hotel, but Tyler or my parents wouldn't let me. Modernized rooms, eco-friendly conveniences, a suitable spa. The catalog continued. Looking at that old edifice, I understood I had no more need to keep battling for something not rightfully mine. I could begin anew. For more than an hour, I sat in that parking lot working through the figures in my thoughts. Most definitely, it would be dangerous. Having spent most of my savings already, purchasing the building would mean incurring a significant debt load. As I considered it, though, the more it seemed like the appropriate action. That evening, I found myself unable to relax. Plans and a million what-ifs were flying through my head. I had decided by the time the sun emerged. As soon as their office opened, I phoned the realtor to set a showing for later that week. Though I had no idea what the future held, I felt as though I had control once more. First in months. This had nothing to do with trying to undo Tyler's faults or proving anything to my parents. It was about creating something for me, something I could be pleased with. Right now, as I'm writing this. That incident in the parking lot marked the first time I had felt really hopeful in a very long time. Though I had no idea how difficult the path ahead would be, I was first thrilled to find where it would lead. The viewing later that week seemed strange. I could see all the flaws in the ancient structure as I was walking across it. Broken fittings, peeling paint, old carpets. Still, I could also see what it might become. The bones of the site where the layout and solidity have so much possibility. Big windows overlooking the valley, roomy quarters, and even a space that might be used properly. Ideas kept whirling in my head. One of those two upbeat realtors, she discussed how the property just needed some upkeep. Not bothered to correct her, I nodded and smiled. Although I knew it would take more than a coat of paint to revive this home, for the first time in months I felt overwhelmed by the difficulty. I felt inspired. By the time the tour ended, I had made decisions. I barely haggled. I simply informed the realtor I would be taking it. She startled me. Most people would have walked away upon seeing the condition of the place. Hence, most likely this is why. She stated she would start the paperwork nevertheless, and recovered fast. That same day, I made a call to the bank, beginning the loan application procedure. Convincing them to give me the money was difficult, but I used every bit of knowledge I possessed, every relationship, and succeeded in getting the money. A few weeks later, when the purchase was completed, I stood in the empty lobby of my new project, staring about at the aged wallpaper and chipped tiles. It was mine, completely mine. Making adjustments did not need asking anyone for permission. I had no one to defend my choices to. That idea was worth all the restless evenings I knew were ahead. The following several months spun out. I immersed myself in the improvements, working side by side with builders to guarantee correct completion. More about plumbing and electrical work than I ever would have need to know. I looked over catalogs for hours, selecting furniture, fixtures, and decor that matched the vision I had for the area. From the paint colors to the way the light would strike the lobby in the morning, every last element counted to me. I also got started assembling a team. A few of the employees of my family's hotel had become tired of Tyler's management and jumped ship as soon as they learned I was starting another location. Among the first to join was Sarah, who had been a front desk agent for years. She said, "I'm not sure what you're planning, but I know it will be better than what we currently have." Tyler's housekeeping head, Patricia, had been fired. Also joined us, saying she felt she would never find employment in the sector again after what had transpired. She started to cry when I extended her the job offer. Word spread fast around the town. People were fascinated. Some were encouraging, some less so. I heard someone at the grocery store berating me for opening a rival motel to her family. I brushed it aside. Not about them. This has nothing to do with my parents or Tyler, either now. This reflected me at last acting for myself. Regarding marketing, I threw all I had. Starting to share them on social media, I hired a local photographer to capture professional images of the ongoing improvements, offering free stays. Once we started, I contacted bloggers and travel bloggers. To find a name that captured the vibe of the location we decided on, I even collaborated with a branding agency. It felt appropriate, aspirational, distinctive, and connected to the mountain views that rendered the site so remarkable. Let me say, though, the tension of organizing all of this was unbelievable. On evenings when I would sit in my car outside the building, I would worry whether I had made a major error. Every unanticipated expense made me nervous since the loan installments hovered over me like a black cloud. I was rapidly running through my savings, and the pressure to have everything perfect was stifling. Every time I considered giving up, though, I reminded myself of the original motivation behind my starting this. The turning moment occurred 4 months into the makeovers. At last, the first room was finished, utterly rebuilt from top to bottom. It was lovely in addition to useful. Just absorbing it, I stood in the doorway for what felt like hours. It sounded real for the first time, like perhaps I could really execute this. What would my folks think of all of this? I wondered. Not because I wanted them to keep it a secret, but rather because I wanted their perspectives to impact my judgments. I told them little about the project. Still, I couldn't get rid of the image of them entering the building and witnessing how unlike it was from the hotel they had created. Would they feel ashamed? Angry? Disappointed? Part of me desired their acceptance, even though another part of me stopped caring. I wasn't ready to tell them straightforwardly. By the time opening day arrived, I was riding pure adrenaline, even after everything. The spot was not flawless. Though ready, I still wanted to change certain things. Inviting friends, relatives, and a few local business owners to check it out, we staged a soft launch. Observing their responses fulfilled what I had hoped for. People continued remarking on things like, "I can't believe this is the same building. This feels like something you would see in a major city, not locally." Checking in first were actual guests. 2 weeks later, a family on a road trip followed by a couple commemorating their anniversary. Observing them investigate the area, seeing their grins while appreciating the facilities and rooms, it made every restless night, every moment of doubt, well worth it. Showing up at the soft launch, my folks entered the lobby unannounced. I hadn't invited them because I wasn't ready for whatever reaction they would bring, not because I wanted them excluded. I stopped for a moment to see their faces as they absorbed everything when I noticed them standing near the front desk. My dad's face was austere. His eyes flicked about the room as he struggled to concentrate on anything. Beside him, my mother stood with firmly crossed arms and a mouth pushed into a tiny line. They spoke little, but my mother's expression conveyed all the information. Not pride was what this was. This was gloom, maybe even disappointment. They stayed around for some time, strolling gently across the lobby and peering into the room. My dad stopped once to run his fingers along the new front desk's edge. "It is different," he remarked at last. His voice was low and strained. My mother spoke hardly at all. I could feel the weight of what they were not saying. I had made this on my own without their approval and found it superior to what they had been clinging to. They said no farewell when they at last went. They simply left me wondering if I had lost something I didn't even know I was still clinging to. The finest thing, nevertheless, is I felt as if I was always staring over my shoulder, waiting for someone to correct me or inform me I was doing something wrong. At last, I was free to create something I could be happy with. And that was quite valuable. Of course, it wasn't perfect sailing. There were problems with the plumbing in one of the guest rooms and hitches in the reservation system that had me running to locate a place for a couple who had reserved months in advance. Still, those difficulties felt different. I owned them to be solved, and I felt for the first time confident enough to manage them. Elevator transcended mere construction. It's evidence that I could succeed without anybody else's permission, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where I was supposed to be. The weeks after the opening of my hotel passed in a haze. Visitors were rolling in, review requests were flooding in, and the labor of love paid off. Every morning when I walked across the lobby, I experienced an odd mix of pride and incredulity, like I couldn't fully understand the reality that this was something I had created from the beginning. But as I adjusted to my new normal, it became more difficult to overlook the difference between my hotel and my parents'. Their hotel was failing not only in the manner it had been before. Vendors began whispering late payments to me. One of the cleaning vendors I had dealt with for years said they stopped supplying to the family hotel as they hadn't received payment in months. The local tour operator said the same thing. They reportedly had been stiffed on a booking commission Tyler had promised them. I tried first to overlook it. It became not of concern to me. I had to operate my own hotel, hence, I couldn't afford to get caught back into the drama. But the indicators kept mounting, and it became impossible to ignore. It was not only the financial aspect of affairs, however. Years of devoted guests from my parents' motel were beginning to float my way. One couple told me they wanted to reserve a weekend there but were turned off by the previous reviews, which highlighted dirty rooms, understaffed service, and even a broken heating system not serviced for weeks. When we visited town, we always stayed there, the woman remarked as I checked them in. But there's a change in something. It does not feel the same today. I said nothing except grinned and handed them their room key. But inside, I couldn't stop thinking about how rapidly things had collapsed. But the look on my parents' faces every time I visited really got to me. Of course, they stopped at the soft launch, but they stayed away afterward, usually at the grocery store or some neighborhood event. When we did run across each other, they appeared tired. My mom had a tight-lipped face that left little space for communication, while my dad's shoulders seemed permanently slanted. One day they turned up at 11, late afternoon, soon after check and rush. Looking more tense than I had ever seen them, my parents arrived in the lobby. My dad kept staring around as though he didn't want to make eye contact with anyone. My mom held her pocketbook like it was a lifeline. "Cassie, can we have a conversation?" my dad asked, his voice softer than normal. I walked them to one of the sitting sections close to the fireplace. They took seats, but neither of them appeared to know where to start. At last, my mother stammered, "We need your help." Not surprised at all. For weeks, ever since the suppliers started grumbling and the reviews collapsed, I had seen it approaching. Still, hearing them say it aloud seemed weird. They dismissed my worries, disregarded my recommendations, and turned the keys over to Tyler for months. And here they were now, wanting me to tidy his mess. "I'm not sure what you want me to do." I spoke cautiously. "You have a chief executive officer. Perhaps you ought to get him to help." "Like I would have done," my dad shucked at that. Though it didn't sound convincing, Tyler stated he's doing his best. "Is he?" I back off since from where I'm standing it doesn't look like it. "Cassie, please." With a cracking voice, my mother said, "Only you know how to make this right." Folding my arms, I slanted back in my chair. "Remember, I tried to help before. Not wanting my assistance at the time, you wished for Tyler?" Rubbing his temples, my dad moaned. "We made a mistake, yes, but we cannot go back and correct it. We really need you right now." I studied them, these two people who had devoted their whole lives to creating something just to see it collapse, and all I felt was fatigued, even if I yearned to feel vindicated. "I'm not able." "Lastly," I said, "I apologize. However, right now I have to run my own company. Here is my advice if you want it. See a professional. Get someone who can really tidy things." Tyler's done. They said nothing else after that. My dad just sat there staring at the floor while my mother seemed as though she would cry. I couldn't concentrate. After some time, they got up and left without another word for the rest of the day. My head kept returning to that chat, running over every syllable, every gesture. I understood I had done the proper thing. I'd battled with setting limits for years, so this was an opportunity to stand my ground. But it didn't make it any simpler. The persistent sense that something wasn't adding up concerned me more, though. It was all too much to just be poor management. Late payments, canceled vendor contracts, a faulty heating system. Even Tyler couldn't botch things so badly on his own. I began to pay closer attention to public opinions on the family. Hotel vendors reported delayed orders due to financial problems. None of them could specifically identify those problems. Former employees suggested Tyler had been altering the payment system in strange ways, but nobody knew what it meant. The last straw came when a visitor who had been at both hotels remarked casually about a rumor they had heard about Tyler. People reported he spends all of his time in Denver. What then is he doing down there? Though I had no response, the question stayed with me. Tyler had not been around much, and the few times he had, he seemed preoccupied. He was not the kind to sit behind a desk, crunching figures. Where then was the money disappearing to? By then, we were doing rather well. Quite better than I had hoped, really. Still, I couldn't get rid of my anxiety. My parents' motel was swiftly sinking, not only suffering, and I sensed that Tyler was not only badly guiding the ship, he was precisely drilling holes in it. Though one thing was obvious, this was not over. I had no idea what to do with that sensation. Not nearly certainly. The unpleasant sensation stayed with me, getting more intense every time I considered the family hotel and the speed of things falling apart there. Tyler was more than simply lazy. Surely there was other stuff going on. I thus got to work excavating. I dug over previous emails, bills, and anything else I could find that could provide hints. Tyler had been lazy. He hadn't changed much since I left the family hotel, and some of the systems still came under my access. It was first only a minor matter. Odd payments under nebulous terms like vendor management or consultation are listed. None of the names matched anything I knew, and a little internet search turned up nothing. Then there came the overstated bills. Regular maintenance, like landscaping or repairs, suddenly costing 3 or 4 times what they ought to. It took little time to see these were more than just errors. Tyler was verifying everything as someone was bleeding the motel dry. I could not stand it anymore. Driven there to see my parents, I carried printouts in hand. Though late, it didn't really matter. The resentment had been building for weeks. Now it was boiling over. They had to understand what was happening. Looking startled to see me, my mother answered the door. "Cassie, is this where you are working? I have to talk to both of you," I said, moving past her right into the house now. My dad was reading the newspaper in the living room, his reading spectacles slanted on his nose. Looked up, perplexed. What is going on? I piled the papers on the coffee table in front of him. "That is exactly what is happening," my voice stammered. "I sold my apartment to spare you from this. I gave my whole life to keep this motel going, and you turned everything over to Tyler." He scowled instantly and grabbed the first page. Perched next to him, my mother looked at the printouts. Her face changed from perplexity to panic. "This is what is meant?" my dad asked, like he hardly wanted to know the response. "It's evidence Tyler has been draining money from the company," I said, my voice more exact than I had wanted. "These payments are fictitious. These businesses did not exist. And the inflated invoices money is not paying vendors. It is elsewhere, usually right out of Tyler's pocket." Mom appeared pale. "Not right is what that is. Tyler couldn't. Surely what?" I cut off. "Not lied, not steal. Look at your mother, open eyes. This explains why the hotel is disintegrating. He intentionally drains it, not only runs it poorly." Dad laid the papers down and massaged his temple. He seemed to be older than I had ever seen, like the weight of everything was at last breaking. "How did you come to locate this?" he inquired gently. I admitted I still have access to some of the systems. Since, to be honest, I didn't trust him, and I was right not to, I have been watching things. Her head was shaking. My mother's. Tears flowing down her face. "Our son Casey, this is him. He would not follow through on this. Something else has to explain it. Then ask him." I crossed my arms and said, "Ask him straight now where the money is going. But given he has been ducking that topic for months, you should not anticipate an answer." My father said nothing at all. His face a mask of hopelessness. He simply sat there staring at the printouts. "Why did you say nothing earlier?" when my mother asked at last. "Since it no longer bothers me," said, "about assigning him responsibility. I cautioned you. He wasn't ready. I told you. And he didn't know what he was doing. You neglected to pay attention, though. You wished you could believe he could manage it. And here is where it has taken you now." Looking up at me, my dad's eyes red-rimmed. "Casey, what ought we to do? How are we to correct this?" The irony made me nearly laugh. After months of disregarding my counsel, they now sought my assistance. But the wrath evaporated just as fast as it arrived, changed with something softer, something I choose not to mention. "You have to face him," I said, seated across from them. "Show this to him. Demand responses. Then, you should call in someone who truly can undo the mess he has created." "An expert consultant? Not even me. You are the only one with business sense." Her voice begging, my mother said, "Today, we trust you. You rely on—" I shook my head and stated, "Rich is it? Look, should you want advice, I will be here to offer it. I am not returning, though, to correct this. You have to work out how to tidy your own mess." After then, they did not fight. My mom cleaned her eyes with a tissue, appearing smaller than I had ever seen her, while my dad nodded solemnly. I kept seeing them seated there, crushed and devastated as I went home that evening. Part of me felt bad about not doing more to support. Still another, though, the component that had been discounted and written off over months. I felt I had done the right thing, knowing this was not the end. I drove back to my motel. Tyler would have to answer for one way or another what he had done, and I wanted to see it when that confrontation arrived, not for payback, but for closure. The past still had a hold on me no matter how far I would come, not ready to let it go just yet either. And the weeks after my parental conflict were shockingly quiet. I checked in, but they never phoned. I assured myself it was for our best. I had a hotel to concentrate on. The family hotel was no more under my purview. Still, the whispers about town persisted, and one could not overlook the difference between the two hotels. While my hotel prospered with consistent occupancy and stellar reviews, still sinking was my folks' hotel. It was like observing a ship gently submerging itself. Tyler was also nowhere to be seen. Then, one morning, Sarah arrived at my workplace grimacingly clutching her phone. She pointed out that you must see this. The title was straightforward: Local Motel Facing Financial Misbehavior Probe. Tyler wasn't specifically mentioned in the paper, but it wasn't necessary. The specifics aligned exactly 2 times. Unpaid invoices. Allegations of fraud connected to unauthorized financial activities and suspicious payments. My gut slumped. The whispers I had been discounting now seemed louder. Tyler was where? Getting the money. Why did merchant payments vary so greatly? Before the bits began to fit together, I had not had to search very far. A vendor verified that invoices had been either completely falsified or exaggerated, and I learned from a Denver contact that Tyler's accounts were flagged for significant unaccounted-for transfers. Even offshore accounts, casinos, failed commercial ventures. It was all right there. When detectives arrived at the family hotel, the hammer dropped at last. A guest informed me that all day government cars had been parked outside. I didn't have to visit to find out what was happening. Everyone in town was talking about Tyler's messy situation as it was disintegrating. My parents called at last that evening. "Cassie, we don't know what to do." Mom's voice broke. They stood still in the records. They are posing questions for which we lack responses. Though over the phone I could sense their desperation, I maintained a consistent tone. I advised months ago to obtain help. Ignoring the warning signals results in this. We just wanted to shield him. With regret weighing on his voice, my dad said, "We have him as our son." "And see where that led you," I said. Though it was the truth, I said it not to be nasty. I felt the weight of it all fall over me once I hung. The choices, the given up values, the results. Everything had led to this point. The reality of their decisions was upon my parents. At last, Tyler was facing responsibility, and under the weight of it all, the family company that had seemed so unquestionable was failing. But I was not bearing that weight anymore. First of all, my motel was doing rather nicely. I had fought for it, not due to chance or anyone's assistance. Every fragment, every nuance, every choice was mine. Even if it stung to see my family's legacy disintegrate, I couldn't help but find some little solace. I had created something from which I couldn't be deprived, and I knew I would be ready for whatever next occurred. I appreciate each of you reading.
Story 4. This story is titled, My Parents Plotted to Trick Me into Paying for a Family Trip to the Bahamas, so I Turned the Tables on Them. Hi, everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free. Support the channel and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. All right, let's get started. All right, here's the deal. I'm 25, male, and until last year, I thought I was doing pretty well for myself. I had a decent job in tech, a tiny but comfortable apartment, and I was handling my own life without any handouts. But my parents somehow managed to pull me back into their chaotic orbit, all because of my older brother, Mike. Now, let me set the stage here. Mike is 27 and still living at home. He's been figuring things out since he was 17. High school, barely graduated college. He's been through 3. The first one booted him out for failing nearly every class except for gym, and the second gave him the boot because of disciplinary issues. He says it was because the professors didn't understand his creative approach to deadlines. But come on, we all know that's code for partying too much and skipping assignments. I can't even remember the deal with the third one or the excuse he'd made. Jobs. Oh, those are a joke. Mike's job history is basically a revolving door. He worked at an electronics store for a while but got caught giving discounts to his friends. Then he tried being a barista, but quit because the customers were too demanding. His most recent gig was at a gym, where he lasted 2 weeks before declaring that early shifts were toxic to his lifestyle. Meanwhile, there's me. I worked my butt off through college, juggling part-time jobs and scholarships to graduate debt-free. I've got a solid job, pay my own bills, and even managed to start building up some savings. But apparently, in my family, being the responsible one doesn't mean you get a pat on the back. It means you're the one they call when they need something. So last year, my parents invited me over for Sunday dinner. No big deal. They do that a lot. My mom makes this amazing lasagna, and my dad likes to grill me about my plans for the future while sipping on his iced tea. It's their thing. But this time, I could tell something was different. We're halfway through dinner, and Mom hits me with this. "Lucas, honey, we've been thinking. Wouldn't it be nice if you moved back home for a while? I almost choked on my garlic bread. What? Why would I do that? Well, she said in her best soothing voice, it just makes sense. Housing prices are insane, and rent is throwing money away. If you moved back, you could save so much for the future. Dad nodded like he was in on some genius plan. Exactly. You're young, Lucas. This is the time to be smart with your money. Plus, you'd be helping out the family. There it was, the guilt trip. My parents are masters of this. They've been playing the family helps family card for as long as I can remember. When Mike wrecked Dad's car as a teenager, family helps family. Lucas. When Mike needed money for books, which I later found out went towards some gaming console, family helps family. Lucas. Still, they made it sound so logical. It'd only be for a little while, Mom added. And it's not like you wouldn't be contributing just a small amount for rent and groceries, way less than you're paying for that apartment of yours. I didn't say yes right away. I liked my apartment. It was tiny, sure, but it was mine. No one nagging me about dishes in the sink. No random family drama. And definitely no Mike bumming around in his pajama pants at 2 p.m., but I also couldn't deny they had a point. Rent was eating up a big chunk of my paycheck, and moving back home could give me a chance to save up. Just think about it, Mom said, flashing that hopeful smile she always uses when she wants me to agree to something. No rush. I spent the next few days mulling it over. On paper, it made sense. I could save money, maybe even enough for a down payment on a house someday. And yeah, part of me thought it might be a chance to reconnect with my family. Things had been a little distant between us since I moved out, and maybe this could fix that. So after a lot of back and forth in my head, I called Mom and said I'd do it. She sounded thrilled. Oh, Lucas, you won't regret this. It'll be so nice to have the family together again. Looking back, that should have been my first red flag. She sounded way too excited about what was supposed to be me helping out the family, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured they were just happy to have me around again. I moved back in the next weekend. They gave me my old room, which hadn't changed much since high school. Same twin bed, same posters on the wall. It was a little weird, but I told myself it was temporary. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. I paid a small rent payment, way less than what I'd been paying for my apartment, and helped out with groceries. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't terrible either. I told myself I'd made the right decision. Mom would gush about how nice it was to have me back, and Dad kept saying things like, "It's good for the family to stick together." Even Mike was weirdly pleasant at first, cracking jokes and actually cleaning up after himself once or twice. But in hindsight, I should have known better. My parents are pros at making things seem fine on the surface while quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes. And Mike? Well, Mike's just Mike. He's been riding the family gravy train for years, and I should have realized that my return was just another stop on his endless ride. At the time, though, I was optimistic. I thought this could actually work. I thought I was helping my family while helping myself. But as you've probably guessed, it didn't take long for things to start feeling off. It started with small little things here and there. For example, Mike's room suddenly got a serious upgrade. I walked past his door one day and saw him setting up a huge flat-screen TV on his wall. His desk had a brand new gaming PC, complete with one of those ridiculous chairs that light up. I asked him where he got the money for all that, and he just shrugged. "I've been saving," he said, without even looking up. Saving from what? I wanted to ask, but I let it go. Maybe he had saved up. Stranger things have happened. But then there was the fridge situation. Every time I bought groceries, it felt like they disappeared within 48 hours. I'd stock up on basics: eggs, milk, bread, and a few snacks. And the next day, I'd find Mike chowing down on a sandwich the size of my head with half the loaf of bread gone. "Did you eat the last of the eggs?" I asked him one morning. "Yeah," he said, casually scrolling on his phone. "I made an omelet. You want me to pick up more or something?" I stared at him, speechless. The guy hadn't bought groceries in years, and now he was acting like it was a minor inconvenience for me to ask. I told Mom about it later, and she just laughed. Oh, Mike, he doesn't think about those things. I'll remind him. Then came the delivery. Every other day, it seemed like Mike was getting a package. Shoes, clothes, random gadgets, stuff he clearly didn't need. Once a delivery guy handed him a massive box that turned out to be a brand new sound system. He was practically giddy setting it up. "Where's all this money coming from?" I asked, trying not to sound too accusatory. "Oh, here and there," he said vaguely. Here and there apparently meant my wallet because the next time I went to do the grocery run, Mom handed me her card and said, "Use this for the family stuff. And if there's anything extra, just cover it. I'll pay you back later." I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was one of those, "we'll square it up later" kind of deals, but later never came. By the time I realized she wasn't keeping track, I'd already covered hundreds of dollars worth of groceries. And then there was the rent situation. When I first moved back, we'd agreed on a small fixed amount I'd pay each month. But about 2 months in, Mom said, "Lucas, I hate to ask, but could you help a little more this month? Things are tight right now." "Sure," I said, figuring it was a one-time thing, except it wasn't. The little extra became the new normal, and suddenly I was paying almost as much as I had been for my apartment when I brought it up. Dad said, "It's just temporary. You're in a better financial position than we are right now, and it's good for the family." That phrase, "good for the family," was starting to sound like a broken record. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the whole vibe. I started noticing how everything revolved around Mike. If he wanted something, my parents bent over backwards to get it for him. If he needed to borrow the car, no problem. If he wanted to have friends over for a movie night, Mom made snacks and told me to be flexible about the noise. Meanwhile, if I leave so much as a dish in the sink, I get a passive-aggressive comment about how we all need to pitch in. One time, I overheard Mom on the phone with her sister bragging about how Mike's finally getting his act together. She went on and on about his plans to start a business. Some vague idea about creating custom sneakers or something. "Lucas is helping us keep things stable," she said, as if my contributions were just some side note in the grand saga of Mike's life. That was it. I walked upstairs, shut my door, and sat on my bed fuming. How had I let things get to this point? I was busting my ass at work, paying for everything, and dealing with this nonsense while Mike got to coast through life like it was one big vacation. I started replaying everything in my head. Mike's new TV, the groceries disappearing, the constant deliveries, the never-ending rent hikes. It all started to click. This wasn't about helping the family. This was about me funding their lifestyle with Mike as the star player and me as the background character keeping the lights on. The next day, I tried talking to my parents about it. I sat them down and said, "Look, I feel like I'm contributing a lot more than we originally agreed on. Can we go back to what we talked about in the beginning?" Mom gave me her usual sweet smile. "Oh, Lucas, we're so grateful for everything you're doing. It's just that things are a little tough right now." "You know how it is," Dad added. "It's not forever. Just until we get back on our feet." They always had an excuse. Always. And every time they made it sound like I was the bad guy for even bringing it up. After that conversation, I started paying closer attention to how things were being handled. I noticed how often Mom and Dad would whisper to each other when they thought I wasn't listening. I saw how Mike seemed to have an endless supply of new projects that required my parents' financial support, and I realized something else. This wasn't going to stop. They weren't planning to get back on their feet. They were planning to keep leaning on me for as long as I let them, but I wasn't going to let them. Not anymore. The final straw happened one Friday night. It was supposed to be my time to unwind after another long, exhausting week at work. I was looking forward to a quiet evening, maybe grabbing some takeout, watching something mindless, and recharging. But of course, nothing is ever simple when it comes to my family. I walked into the house and was greeted by chaos. The living room looked like a frat party. Aftermath. Empty soda cans and chip bags were everywhere, and Max, Mike's hyperactive dog, was barking his head off at some random noise outside. Mike was sprawled on the couch, his feet up on the coffee table, gaming as usual. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "Can you clean this up?" It's disgusting in here. He barely glanced at me. Yeah, I'll get to it later. He mumbled, his eyes glued to the TV screen. Not later, I said louder this time. Now, I've been at work all day, and the last thing I want to do is come home to this mess. Dude, chill, he said, pausing his game. It's just a few cans. Why are you so uptight all the time? I felt my patience snap up tight. Mike, this isn't just about a few cans. It's every damn day I'm working my ass off while you sit around doing nothing, and you can't even clean up after yourself. What's your problem? He shot back, standing up. You moved back in? Not me. No one asked you to play housemaid. We were yelling at this point, and Max, clearly not a fan of the noise, started barking even louder. Are you serious right now? I shouted. I've been paying rent, buying groceries, and covering bills, and you think I'm just being a maid? You've been mooching off mom and dad for years, and now you're trying to act like I'm the problem. Mike rolled his eyes and waved me off. Oh, here we go again. Poor Lucas, always so responsible. You're not a saint, dude. If you don't like it, leave. No one's forcing you to stay. That hit harder than I expected. You know what? I said, shaking my head. You're right. I don't have to stay, and I'm done. He looked surprised for a second, but quickly masked it with a smirk. Good. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. I stormed upstairs, slamming my door behind me. I wasn't going to back down this time. I grabbed my duffel bag and started packing. I didn't care if it was late or inconvenient. I was done as I threw clothes and essentials into my bag. I couldn't stop replaying the argument in my head. How had I let it get to this point? Why had I stayed as long as I did? The answers didn't matter anymore. I just knew I wasn't going to spend another night under this roof. I carried my duffel bag downstairs, ready to leave, but just as I reached the bottom step, I heard the front door open. Mom and Dad were back from their dinner. Oh, Lucas, what are you doing? Mom asked, her cheerful tone shifting to confusion as she noticed my bag. I'm leaving, I said flatly. What? She asked, stepping closer. Why? What happened? Before I could respond, Mike came into the room, still wearing his smug expression from earlier. He's just being dramatic, he said, leaning against the wall. Mom's face fell dramatically. Mike, what did you do? Nothing, he said defensively. We had a little argument, and now he's blowing it way out of proportion. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. A little argument? You told me no one asked me to stay and that I should just leave if I don't like it. So here I am leaving. Mom turned to Mike, her voice dropping to that soft, serious tone she uses when she's trying to keep things calm. Mike, you need to apologize to your brother for what? Mike said, crossing his arms for making him feel unwelcome. She said firmly, we need Lucas here. He's been helping out so much, and it's not fair to push him away like this. Dad, who had been quiet up until now, added, she's right. If Lucas leaves, it's going to make things a lot harder for all of us. You need to make this right, Mike. Mike groaned. Fine, I'll apologize. Whatever. I stood there staring at them in disbelief. They weren't asking him to apologize because they cared about me or wanted me to feel appreciated. They were asking because they needed me to stay so they could keep taking advantage of me. All those months of thinking I was helping my family, of hoping that maybe we were reconnecting, and it all boiled down to this. I was just their meal ticket. Don't bother, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. I'm not staying. And no fake apology is going to change my mind. Lucas, wait, Mom said, stepping in front of me. We can work this out. Let's just sit down and talk. No, I said firmly, I'm done. I've had enough. Mom's face fell, and for a moment she looked genuinely upset. But then she straightened up and said, You're being unreasonable. We're a family, Lucas? Exactly, I said. Families help each other, but that's not what's happening here. This is one-sided, and I'm done playing along. I walked past her and opened the door. As I stepped outside, I heard Mike mutter, Whatever, he'll be back. I didn't bother responding. I just walked out to my car, threw my bag in the back seat, and drove off. That night, I crashed at my friend Jake's place. He didn't even ask questions. He just handed me a blanket and said, Stay as long as you need. Lying on his couch, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's expectations on my shoulders. I knew they'd blow up my phone the next day, and they did. But I didn't care. A couple of months after I moved out, I was finally starting to feel normal again. Living at my buddy Jake's place had been a lifesaver, and I'd eventually found my own apartment. A small but cozy spot that didn't come with all the strings attached to living with my family. I was settling into a routine, and life was peaceful. Then one day I got a call from Mom. I didn't pick up at first because, honestly, I wasn't in the mood for one of her guilt trips. But she left a voicemail. So I opened it later. "Hi, Lucas, it's Mom. I just wanted to talk. We've been thinking about you and really miss having you around. We know things got tense, but we want to make it up to you. Give me a call back when you can. Love you." That "love you" at the end felt so forced it made my skin crawl. Still, I figured I should at least hear her out. Maybe this was an olive branch, so I called her back. She answered on the first ring, her voice syrupy sweet. "Lucas, I'm so glad you called. How are you?" "Fine," I said cautiously. "What's up?" "Well," she started drawing the word out. "We've been talking, and we realized we didn't treat you very fairly when you were living here, and we feel awful about it." I wasn't buying it. So she continued, "We were thinking we could do something special as a family, to reconnect and make things right. What do you think about a luxury family vacation?" Now, if this had been anyone else, I might have been excited. Who doesn't love a good vacation? But this was my family, and I knew better than to trust anything that sounded too good to be true. Still, I played along. "I don't know," I said. "What kind of vacation?" "A tropical getaway," she said, her voice practically dripping with enthusiasm. "Beautiful beaches, amazing food, relaxation. It'll be perfect. We were thinking of a resort in the Bahamas. What do you think?" I hesitated. It was tempting. A vacation like that sounded amazing, and honestly, I could use the break. But this was my parents, and they didn't have a great track record when it came to being upfront about things. "Okay," I said cautiously. "Let me think about it." "Oh, wonderful," she said, clearly trying to hide her eagerness. "Take your time, but let us know soon so we can start planning." There was no way this was as innocent as it seemed. My family didn't just want to reconnect. They wanted something. And considering how things had gone before, I had a pretty good idea of what it was. Still, I figured I'd stop by their place to hear the full pitch. If nothing else, it might be entertaining. So a few days later, I drove over to the house. When I got there, everything seemed normal to normal. Mom greeted me at the door with her usual over-the-top enthusiasm. Dad was sitting in his recliner, looking perfectly content, and Mike was nowhere to be seen. It was like they were trying to set the stage for the perfect family moment. We sat down in the living room and Mom launched into her sales pitch. She talked about how much she missed me, how important family was, and how this trip could be a fresh start for all of us. She even threw in a few guilt-laced lines like, "Family is all we've got, Lucas, and we just want to make it up to you." Dad chimed in with his usual practical angle. "It's a great opportunity for us to bond. And Lucas, you've been working so hard. You deserve a break." I stayed quiet, nodding occasionally, letting them do their thing. But as the conversation went on, it became clear they were trying way too hard. Eventually, I said, "Okay, so how is this going to work?" Mom smiled. "We were thinking it'd be easiest if you handled the booking. We'll give you all the details, dates, preferences, that kind of thing, and you can book it. Then we'll pay you back right after." "Right after?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, of course," she said quickly. "We just thought it'd be simpler for one person to coordinate everything." At that moment, I heard the garage door open. Mike had arrived. I wasn't planning to stick around. Sure enough, as I was heading toward the door, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "Once Lucas agrees to book everything," Mom said, "we'll promise to pay him back, but we won't." Mike's voice chimed in, laughing. "He owes us anyway." And then Dad. "He'll get over it, like always. He's got the money." I stood there for a moment, stunned but not entirely surprised. This wasn't about reconnecting. It was just another scheme to use me, like always. I left without saying goodbye and started planning my next move. If they wanted me to book a trip, I'd give them a trip. All right. But it wasn't going to be the one they expected. This time, I was going to turn the tables. The plan started forming almost immediately. I'd agree to book the trip, but it wasn't going to go the way they thought. Let's just say they were about to learn what happens when you underestimate the guy who's been paying attention all along. When I got home, I called Mom and said, "Okay, I'll do it. Send me everyone's preferences and I'll handle the booking." "Oh, Lucas, thank you so much," she gushed. "We knew you'd come around. This is going to be so wonderful." All right. So here's the thing. When I agreed to book the trip, my parents thought they'd already won. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. If they wanted to trick me, I'd give them a trick they'd never forget. The first step was to keep everything calm and normal. I couldn't let them suspect I was onto them. So when Mom started bombarding me with texts about dates, preferences, and room types, I played along. "Sure, Mom. Sounds great. I'll handle it." She even called me a few times to double-check that I was still okay paying up front. But I stayed cool. "Yeah, no problem. I've got it covered." She probably thought I was the perfect sucker. Once I had all their details, dates, flight times, and room preferences, I got to work instead of booking a trip for 4 like they expected. I booked a trip for 1. Me. I found an all-inclusive luxury resort in the Bahamas with a private villa, ocean views, and room service. The works for the fake trip. I used my tech skills to whip up some pretty convincing reservations. I created fake itineraries for their hotel stays, making sure everything looked legit. I even added a little flair. Things like complimentary breakfast and VIP check-in to make it seem extra special. But here's where it gets better. I booked their flights using a travel agency that I knew allowed only the primary account holder, me, to make changes. That way, if or when they figured out the trick, I could cancel the flights with a single click. And of course, I gave them fake tickets that had the wrong departure time on them. Now I know what you're thinking, Lucas. This is a lot of effort just to mess with your family. And you'd be right. It was a lot, but after everything they'd put me through, I figured they deserved it. Plus, the satisfaction of knowing I was finally standing up for myself, totally worth it. The day of the trip rolled around, and I made sure to keep up the act. I called Mom that morning to confirm the details. "Your flight leaves at 11 a.m., I told her. "Don't forget to get there early for security and make sure you bring the printouts I sent you. Some airlines are picky about digital tickets." "Oh, thank you, Lucas," she said, her voice dripping with gratitude. "We're so excited. This is going to be the best trip ever." I could almost hear her smirking through the phone. Meanwhile, I was already packed and ready to go. My flight on a completely different airline was set to leave 2 hours earlier, so I made sure to head to the airport long before they would arrive at the airport. I kept my phone on long enough to see Mom's "We're on our way" text pop up. I sent back a quick "safe travels. Can't wait to see you at the resort" before turning on airplane mode and boarding my flight. The resort was everything I'd hoped for and more. As soon as I got to my room, I took a picture of the view from my balcony and sent it to them with the caption, "Made it. Hope you're having a smooth trip." The satisfaction of knowing they had no idea what was coming was almost as good as the view. Almost. I knew they wouldn't realize anything was wrong until they got to the airport. Their fake flight tickets had the wrong departure time, 2 hours later than the real flight. By the time they showed up at the gate, the plane would already be in the air. I imagined the scene. Mom frantically waving the fake tickets at the airline staff, Dad grumbling about how this is why we don't let Lucas handle things, and Mike standing off to the side, probably scrolling on his phone, completely oblivious to the chaos. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was that once they realized the flight had left without them, they'd call me. And when they did, I'd be ready. Sure enough, my phone buzzed about an hour after their flight was supposed to depart. It was Mom. I let it ring. Then Dad called. I let that one ring too. Finally, Mike sent a text. "Dude, WTF? The flight's gone." I waited a few minutes before replying. "What do you mean? I'm at the resort. Didn't you get on the flight?" The response came almost immediately. "Our tickets don't work. They said the flight already left." I smiled and typed back. "That's weird. Everything was fine with my flight. Let me check on it when I get to Wi-Fi before I turn my phone back to airplane mode." I sent one last message to the group chat. A picture of me lounging by the pool, sunglasses on, drink in hand with the caption, "Enjoy your vacation." Oh, wait. Guess it's just me this time. Cheers. And then I turned my phone off. The next few days were bliss. I swam, ate incredible food, and lounged in the sun without a single guilt trip or passive-aggressive comment from anyone knowing they were stuck at home trying to figure out what went wrong. Made it even better. Today's my last day here. I feel completely refreshed, but I also know the real fun is waiting for me back home. I'll refresh you soon after I get home. All right, so let me tell you what happened when I got back from my solo luxury vacation. I knew the fallout was going to be epic, but even I wasn't prepared for how ridiculous my family's reaction would be. If you thought they were manipulative before, just wait. I flew back home after the most relaxing week of my life. The resort was perfect, and for once I felt like I treated myself the way I deserve. But as soon as I got to my apartment, I saw them. Yep. My parents and Mike were camped out right outside my door like they were staging an intervention. Mom looked furious, Dad was red-faced and pacing, and Mike, well, he just looked annoyed, probably because he had to leave his PlayStation for this. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, Mom launched into it. "How could you do this to us, Lucas?" She practically shrieked. "We were standing at the airport like idiots. The tickets you gave us didn't work." Dad chimed in, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone. The airline staff said those tickets weren't even real. Do you have any idea how that made us look?" I unlocked my door calmly and said, "Oh, I know exactly how it made you look." Then I walked inside, leaving the door open because I knew they weren't going anywhere until they got their rant out. Mike was the last to enter, muttering, "This is so dumb," under his breath. For once, I agreed with him. "Sit down," I said, motioning to the couch. They didn't. Instead, Mom crossed her arms and stood in the middle of the living room, her face a mix of anger and frustration. "Why would you do this, Lucas?" she asked, her tone switching to the classic disappointed parent voice. "We just wanted to spend time with you as a family." I couldn't help but laugh. "Family? Really? You mean the same family that plotted to use me to pay for the whole trip? The same family that wasn't planning to pay me back? I overheard you in the kitchen, remember? Don't act like this was about reconnecting." Their faces went pale, and for a second, there was complete silence. Then Dad, ever the defensive one, said it was just a misunderstanding. "We didn't mean it like that." "Oh, really?" I said, pulling out my phone. I tapped the screen a few times, then hit play. The recording I'd made of their kitchen conversation filled the room. I hit pause and slid my phone back into my pocket. "Still a misunderstood landing?" I asked, looking directly at Dad. Mom opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she said that was taken out of context. I laughed harder this time. "Out of context? You literally said you weren't going to pay me back. How much clearer does it need to be?" Mike, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Okay, fine. Maybe we were going to let you cover it, but it's not like you can't afford it. You're doing fine." I turned to him, my blood boiling. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mike. Is it my responsibility to fund your vacations now? Or does that only apply when Mom and Dad run out of money, bailing you out of whatever mess you've made this time?" "Don't talk to your brother like that," Mom snapped. "He's been working hard." "Working hard?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "At what?" "He hasn't worked a real job in years, but somehow he's always got new gadgets and trips planned. Meanwhile, I'm the one busting my ass, and you expect me to just hand over my money like it's nothing? No, not anymore." Dad tried to step in, his tone calmer but still condescending. "Lucas, we're family. You shouldn't be airing our dirty laundry like this. That was the last straw." "You want to talk about family?" I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Family doesn't manipulate each other. Family doesn't treat one kid like an ATM while letting the other coast through life without consequences. You don't get to pull the family card now just because you're mad. I didn't let you use me this time." They didn't have much to say after that. Mom tried to guilt me one last time, saying, "You've changed, Lucas. You're not the same person you used to be." "Yeah, I have changed," I said, I've learned how to stand up for myself, and you're mad because you can't control me anymore." With that, I opened the door and gestured for them to leave. "We're not done talking about this," Dad said as he walked out. "Oh, I think we are," I replied, shutting the door behind them. The next day, the real fallout began. My phone started blowing up with messages from extended family and mutual friends, all saying some version of "how could you treat your parents like that? And you're being so selfish." Apparently, Mom and Dad had wasted no time spreading their version of the story, according to them. I'd tricked them with fake tickets as some kind of cruel prank, leaving out the part where they were planning to screw me over in the first place. So now I'm thinking about getting back at them. I have something in mind. I'll refresh you guys after it's done. Here's the refresh you've all been waiting for. After the chaos my family had caused, I decided to lay it all out there. No more secrets, no more pretending. I figured if my parents were going to tell their version of the story to everyone who would listen, I deserved to tell mine too. I had to set the record straight, so I did what any sane person in this day and age would do. I took it to Facebook. I wrote a long, detailed post explaining everything. I started with how my parents convinced me to move back home under the guise of helping the family, only for them to slowly shift all the financial burdens onto me. I laid out how they'd been using me to bankroll Mike's lifestyle while making me feel like I wasn't contributing enough. I didn't hold back. I described how I overheard their conversation about tricking me into paying for the vacation, how they had no intention of paying me back. Of course, I also included the part everyone was most curious about, my revenge. But here's where I really drove the point home. I attached the recording, the one where my parents and Mike spelled out their entire scheme. Laughing about it, I made sure to preface the post with a clear disclaimer. This isn't to humiliate anyone. I'm sharing this because my parents have been spreading their side of the story, and I think it's only fair that my friends and family hear the truth. You can decide for yourselves who's in the wrong. I hit post and sat back, waiting to see what would happen. The reaction was immediate. Within an hour, the post had dozens of comments and shares. People who had initially bought my parents' sob story started backtracking fast. I had no idea this was the full story. One cousin wrote, "I'm so sorry for judging you, Lucas. You were right to stand up for yourself." A family friend who'd known us since we were kids commented, "Wow, I always thought your parents favored Mike, but I didn't realize it was this bad. Good for you for getting out of that toxic situation." One of my mom's closest friends sent me a message saying, "I can't believe they did this to you. I'm so sorry. I believed them without hearing your side first. You didn't deserve any of that." As for my parents, oh, they were furious. Mom left a series of comments on the post, all variations of, "I can't believe you're airing our private family matters online. You're making us look terrible." Dad's response was more threatening. He wrote, "You better take this down, Lucas. You're crossing a line and you'll regret it." I didn't respond to either of them. Instead, I edited the post to include a short refresh at the bottom for anyone wondering. I stand by everything I've said here. I won't be taking this post down, no matter how many threats or guilt trips I receive. Mike, unsurprisingly, stayed silent on the post itself, but he did send me a private message that said, "Wow, dude, really? You think this is okay?" I didn't bother replying to him either. Over the next few days, the fallout continued. More relatives and family friends reached out, some offering support, others trying to mediate. A few suggested I should be the bigger person and take the post down to avoid further conflict. But at that point, I wasn't interested in conflict resolution. I was interested in finally being free from their manipulation. The breaking point came when my parents showed up at my apartment again. I didn't let them in this time, but I stood in the doorway while Mom begged me to fix this mess. "You've ruined our reputation," she said, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to us, Lucas? We're your parents. You ruined your own reputation," I told her. All I did was tell the truth. If that embarrasses you, maybe you should take a hard look at your behavior instead of blaming me. With that, I closed the door. Later that day, I made one final post on Facebook. "I want to thank everyone who reached out with kind words and support. For those who think I went too far, I respect your opinion, but I stand by my decision to share the truth with my family. I'm done. I've tried to help you. I've tried to set boundaries. And I've tried to be the bigger person. None of it has worked because you don't respect me or my contributions. From now on, I'm prioritizing my own well-being. Please don't call, text, or show up at my apartment. I'm moving forward with my life. And that doesn't include you. Then, after they saw my post, I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on Facebook, and set my profile to private. Life is quieter now, and I've been focusing on building relationships with people who actually respect and care about me. Cutting ties wasn't just the best decision for me. It was the only decision for anyone reading this who's struggling with toxic family dynamics. You deserve peace, you deserve respect, and you deserve to put yourself first. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. I'm finally free, and it feels incredible.